Okay, I think everything is going okay. So, um, let me turn off the echo, which I don't like. Hey, Google user, one of the community said that they like the updates, so I'm going to give you a little update. I'm really excited. If this works out, I've been contacted by Adherent Apologetics, which is another apologetics show where they interview apologists and those involved and talk to people about key issues. And I guess they'd heard about me, and I am slated, if the Lord wills, to actually have a chance to actually be on the show. So I'm very excited about that. And getting to know the gentleman who does the show and the collaboration there. So I'm really excited about that. That's a big update. And so I would give that. Um, Switch over to my nice Jerusalem background, which should be coming up. Um, just by way of intro, I hope this is working well. I've changed the key rate. So if you guys see that the picture is not to your liking, let me know and I'll drop the frames per second down and we'll make it even better. But I'm just fiddling a little here. Uh, I will not have any problems with this upon trying to switch over to OBS. So, top of the evening, we went out for Father's Day tonight because my daughter's birthday is on Sunday. And so we couldn't change the day of her birth, so we changed the day we celebrated Father's Day. And so that was really fun. And so it's going to tie into our Nash of Hebrew. So let me get us up here, throw the Nash of Hebrew down. Now we're going to be looking at the beginning of the next chapter. And Jesus is going to go from teaching parables to his disciples and to the crowd and we're going to see some reactions to Jesus, and we're going to see what we can learn from those reactions. And so we're all set to do that. Um, Let me go to our Nash of Hebrew. Now, I thought it was terribly appropriate to have our Nash of Hebrew relate to Father's Day. So instead of relating it to the passage, I related it to Father's Day. Now, Father's Day is certainly not an ancient Hebrew holiday, and it probably was not celebrated at one point in Europe, but it was an idea that someone had in this country, which I think was a very good one. They saw the value of fatherhood and saw how that was important. And so they created Father's Day and Mother's Day. And we've done Mother's Day. And so now we're up on Father's Day. And so I should show you the cute little mug. I'll save that for next week, maybe, that I got for Father's Day, do a little product placement. Um, but I did not have time to kind of pull that out. I was going to have a drink in it and then drink a little something so that you guys could see it and do like some subtle product placement. And so I'm thinking about how to do all that. But the word for tonight for our Nash of Hebrew is the Hebrew word for father, Av. In plural, Av, because of the form of the noun. Now understand that there's no neuter in Hebrew. There's male and female. And sometimes nouns, which refer to a male thing, have a form that pluralizes in the female. It's just the way it is. And so Av is certainly not referring to females. It's referring to males, but because of the nounal form, because of the form of the noun, it takes the plural female ending. So we say avot. Ot is actually the female plural ending. And we're going to talk a little bit about Av and Abba. Um, so the way Av works is if you were to dot that second letter, remember this is a Nash of Hebrew, so we got to have a little Nash here. If you dot that, that letter makes a B sound. If you leave it undotted without a hardening dot, it makes a V sound. There are a few letters like this. And so this is one of them. And so we say Av, but Abba is because of the dotting of that second letter. Now remember, we read Hebrew the opposite way as English. We don't read it the wrong way because I'm not convinced that English is written the right way. But we read it this way. We read it from right to left. And that second letter, that second symbol you see there, is dotted when you say Abba, but Av, it's not dotted. It means father or forefather, but it can have an extended meaning to originator or chief or uh, ancestor, like my father ancestrally. Okay? So when I talk about Abraham, my father, it doesn't mean that my dad's name was Abraham. And I think you're probably familiar with that sort of usage. Um, it is used a whole lot. Just to let you know, it's a very, very used noun. I'm going to fix this, I think. No, I'm not going to fix this. The bottom got cut off a little. Okay. Abi, it's used 1,191 times in the biblical Old Testament, plus 9 times in the Aramaic. So it is a very used form. And so it can have the idea of chief. Some like to give meanings to the Hebrew letters based on the word or a letter being associated with a word or a concept, treating Hebrew much more like a Chinese or Japanese. We talk about Paleo Hebrew. I don't get into Paleo Hebrew much because I'm not really very paleo. I'm only about 58 years old, and so I really don't go back that far. I don't like to fiddle with that stuff. It is a good mnemonic device. If you take Aleph as meaning the ox or strong one, Beit as Beit being the word house, and also the name of that letter, the strong one of the house, it's a way to remember what Av means. But I just remember what Av means. I saw it enough in the prayer book growing up that when I went to seminary Hebrew, the name, the word Av or Avot, I was familiar with. Avinu, our father. And so I didn't have any problem and I didn't need any of that device. And so I don't much mess with that. Um, there's a question about its relationship to certain roots and cognate. Now, cognates are important. Cognates are when you find words that have a similar meaning and structure in other related, very closely related languages. So sometimes if someone's speaking Arabic, I can recognize cognates. Let me give you an example. Shalom Aleichem, Salam Aleikum. You can see the cognates there. And so there are these cognates that exist, and they're very helpful when a word's only used once in the Bible. And there's a fancy term for a word that only appears once. And so sometimes we have to figure it out by context, but we can also look at cognates or related languages because they'll share somewhat of the same words or word forms and vocabulary. And so there's the idea in Assyrian of Abu, which has the idea of deciding. The father is the decider. And so we wonder about that. He's the primary begetter. The idea of father is procreator, originator, the one who brings forth. When we talk about the Godhead, we're not saying that Jesus is a created being. That's an ancient heresy. But what we are saying is that God is essentially, well, we'll get to that. But there's a terminology there. And then there's a usage for son. We're not going to get into that because it's really coming up on Father's Day, not Son's Day. But that is the noun that we're dealing with. So tonight, you know the word Av, father, or forefather, or sometimes even chief. So now you have a Hebrew word, uh, but it's a fascinating Hebrew word, and I want to give you some insight that you may not have, because I will hear things from Christians that sound good on the surface, but they're not exactly theologically balanced. In other words, there's more biblical data than they're taking into account. The fatherhood of God is one of those. And I've done sermons on the material. You're going to see that in this one slide. I have a whole sermon on that. What the different fatherhoods, notice I'm using the plural there, fatherhoods of God. And I'll hear things like, God is not the father of the unsaved. Now, in one sense, that is very importantly true. but in another sense, that's not entirely true. So I want to help you out with here because father is used of God in different senses. There are different fatherhoods of God. Now, how can I'm going to prove this right from the scriptures. Malachi 2:10, have we not one father, has not one God created us? Now, that's in parallelism in the Hebrew, which means the next thought clarifies or expands the previous thought or contrasts it. Now, this is a synthetic sort of parallelism where the first sentence is further clarified and amplified, or clarified in this case, by the second sentence. Have we not one Father divine, referring to God as creator? So this is the creational fatherhood of God. There isn't any other creator. There's one God who made humankind. And in the sense of being the originator of, which is part of the meaning of fatherhood, God is the originator of humankind. In other words, the first beginning humans were created, they were originated, they were brought into being by God. That's the creational fatherhood of God, and all people share that. They're image bearers. They're image bearers because they were created in the image of God. He is their creational father. Now, it doesn't mean they live in covenant relationship with him or they're in relationship with him, but it means they could be in relationship to him, and he would desire that for him because he created them for that relationship. There is God being the father of Israel. Now, I'm not making this up. This is right in the Bible. Then you shall say, and Moses is being told what to say by God. So this isn't just a figment of Moses' imagination. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn. So God tells Moses to go to Pharaoh and say, this nation, Israel, this people group, they are my son, collectively and theocratically. So God is the father of Israel. So there's the theocratic fatherhood of God, where God has chosen a nation and his rule is connected with the restorations and dealings with that nation. Then there is the redemptive fatherhood of God. Now, that's the one that Christians are most familiar with, where we talk about we have the Spirit of God who cries out, Abba, Father. Abba is from Av. It's the Aramaic affectionate term. It's daddy. All right? And that's the redemptive fatherhood of God. Now, not all of Israel is saved, so the theocratic fatherhood of God does not guarantee personal salvation. And the creational fatherhood of God allows for God to have created a plan by which we can be redeemed. In other words, it permits redemption, but doesn't guarantee it or grant it. The fatherhood of Israel does not guarantee the salvation of every Jew, but it grants that Jews can be saved and that God has a plan to do something with that theocratic nation. The redemptive fatherhood of God is what you and I enjoy in Jesus Christ, where we have access to the resources of the household. See, a son had access to the resources of his father in the ancient world. He was not necessarily the ruler over those resources, nor could he use those resources independently, but he had access to the resources. Hence the parable of the prodigal son, which we will get to. And the older son complains, and the father says, if you had not asked me, would I not have killed a calf for you and let you have a party with your friends? You had access to my resources. And so that's the redemptive fatherhood of God. It guarantees us eternity in the household. It gives us access to the resources of the household, and it gives us personal, intimate relationship with the Father. There's another one, okay, that's uniquely, Jesus is uniquely the Son of God. Now, I didn't go into that one. That's the adoptive fatherhood of God. Or a little different way. That's a different fatherhood. Okay? That's like an ontological fatherhood in which the The Son, the second person of the Trinity, stands in a unique relationship to the first person in the Trinity. So I don't want to use adoptive because that sounds a lot like redemptive. But the point is that Jesus is uniquely the Son of God, which makes God uniquely his Father by virtue of his connection in the Godhead that you and I will never have. This is a chief difference between us and Mormons. Mormons believe we can become God. We can become little gods and goddesses and populate our own planets and play a game of Risk. And that's what Mormonism reminds me of. And I'm not trying to be flippant, but to be frankly honest, that's really what it's all kind of about. You have little spirit children, they're like your army, and then you get to like take over a world and have your own world. See, the problem with that is it confuses the redemptive fatherhood of God with the ontological fatherhood of God. And so Joseph Smith, being highly misinformed, misunderstood God's fatherhoods and in a false way equated ontological fatherhood, because the Father is ontologically in his person in a set relationship to the God the Son, with the redemptive fatherhood of God, which you and I have access to, but we do not share God's nature completely. We will never be omni. Omni is all. We will never be omnipotent. We will never be all powerful. We will never be omniscient. We will not be all knowing. We will never be those attributes of God are non-shareable. Theologians say they're non-communicatable. God does not give them to anyone else. They're a part of his glory that he does not share. And so that helps us with a lot of doctrine. I'm not going to get into the unique emptying of God, the Son, to become the incarnate Son, but that's all important doctrine. And so these fatherhoods are really important, and it's very appropriate that before Father's Day we take a little time to appreciate the fatherhoods of God, not just the fatherhood of God. So you've just gotten some really neat theology. So hit the like button, and if anyone else comes in, feel free to do that after you view this too. It is much appreciated. You just got a mini course in several areas, and you now can appreciate the multifold fatherhood of God on Father's Day. Isn't that great? Refrigerator Magnet saying, while tried and true wisdom has been tried, so it may well be true, the majority opinion is wrong the majority of the time. We're going to look at the responses to Jesus, and the majority, the mob, did not get it right. So I am not saying that people or tried and true wisdom passed down through the ages is false. What I am saying is focus groups do not arrive at truth. In other words, we don't do a focus group on Jesus to decide whether he's Lord. Now understand why this is important, because nowadays focus groups are the rage. We figure out what public opinion says. Public opinion says this, it must be true. Well, we're going to look at the responses to Jesus. We're going to discover that public opinion probably wasn't the best thing to go by. And we're going to learn a little bit more. So there's our refrigerator magnet saying for this week. We start with the parable of the dragnet. Now that's the last parable, and we need to finish up there. We started talking about it, but it's good to review. This is the last parable that Jesus tells in the chapter before he moves on. So this is the last of this section of parables. Now remember, Matthew is not necessarily going chronologically. By the way, appreciation for the Toda Robah. That's just thank you. And so that's kind of neat. Not that I mind thank you in English, but someone is getting better and better with their Hebrew keyboard. So that's really excellent. By the way, now you can add Toda Rabbah to your Abba on Father's Day. You can thank your father. And you can add that to your Hebrew vocabulary. So, this is the last parable. Jesus is going to move on. Matthew's not trying to be chronological. Matthew's trying to be thematic and contextual in a sense. He's trying to tell the story in a way that would make sense to a Jewish audience. And that's why we have 4 gospels, because Jesus' story is exactly the same and all of them agree, but their focuses are different. Okay? And so the parable dragnet is the last one we're going to go to. Again, now there's Pelin. The kingdom of, I believe it's Pelin, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet. Now it's important to understand that's the way they fish. They didn't stick a little rod in there and reel it in. That's the way we fish. These guys want massive fish to bring to the market massively all at once, and so they throw a net in. I don't have any pictures of that, but you take a big net, you throw it in, you pull it in, the fish get caught in the net, and you get a whole bunch of fish at once. And so, if you're wondering about the term dragnet, that's where it comes from. And we still use it today. The police throw a dragnet around the city to catch the criminal. And so that has entered. And so the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet. Oh, really? How is the kingdom of heaven like a dragnet? That was cast into the sea and gathered some of every kind, which when it was full, they drew to shore. So they pulled the dragnet in and it gathered all kinds of fish. Okay? And so they gathered the good fish. Those are the edible fish in edible condition here, good fish. They threw the bad away because, see, those aren't going to sell and there's no reason. And they can go off and, just not be a part of things because they're not going to be good fish. They're just not edible. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come forth, separating the wicked from the just and casting them into the furnace of fire where there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. And so Jesus is comparing the kingdom of heaven to a dragnet, which is cast out. There are good fish and bad fish. And the angels will come forth, and there'll be a separating, just like there was the separating of the good fish and bad fish, the wicked from the good. All right. The judgment will include all. The righteous will be separated to spiritual blessing, while the wicked will receive an entirely different destiny. And so that's what this is telling us. And so the angels are involved, but we'll get to that. Now, one of the big claims of folks like Rabbi Singer is that Jesus never taught hell. I mean, that Judaism never taught hell. Jesus taught hell. He would make the claim that hell is something that Christianity uses to scare people into believing in Jesus. Aren't we horrible? We just scare people into believing in Jesus. We're really nasty folks. And that's essentially what would be argued by someone like Rabbi Singer. Now, I want to go ahead and give you a little insight. There was a program that I did a while ago dealing with hell and eternity. Now, you're best if you get the PowerPoint. The latest PowerPoint has all this good stuff, including the fatherhood of God. It's available. Just because there was no way to take this amount of data and really summarize it really well without me having sources. So I'm bringing that up for you a little bit, and you should be able to see it better. Isidore Singer's A Jewish Encyclopedia is very good on this and contains an article related to the doctrine of resurrection and the eschatological teachings current among Jews during the beginning of the Second Temple period on pages 671 and 672. If you are a Logos fan, by the way, I think there is a way I can promote Logos, and there may soon come a day when the channel gets large enough that I can give discounts. Vocab can do that. That'll be a fun time for me. But let me read you a little bit to help with this. First of all, this is a terribly important thing because at the beginning of the Second Temple, they began to ask questions about what the fate of Israelites will be at the judgment, not just the nations. So they got concerned about the nations, the people, and the people of Israel, definitely in particular. Remember, the coming day of the Lord was looked upon as a time when wrongs were to be set right. It was a naturally, indeed, necessity that the expected judgment should appear as the final triumph of the righteous over the wicked. All right? Hence, the doctrine of the resurrection of righteous Israelites was already formulated in Isaiah 26:19, 25:8, which assumes such as in the hands of the apocalyptic writers. They point out Daniel 12:1 and 2, where Daniel talks about this very thing. And so the idea of hell and a eternal punishment was a part of the Second Temple period. Christians didn't invent hell. Jesus didn't invent hell. It was part of Jewish thinking during the Second Temple period. In fact, the rabbis talked a lot about hell. Now, their concepts were divided. My old joke, 3 Jews, 4 opinions, right? Not all the rabbis agreed on the particulars, but there was the idea of divine judgment, which, by the way, is inculcated into the 13 articles of Maimonides and even into the 3 articles of Saadia Gaon, who formulated something like the 13 articles way earlier, but he only had 3 articles of Orthodox belief that were required that explained Judaism that Jews were supposed to accept. And one of those items included a belief in divine reward and punishment. So the idea of divine reward and punishment is totally consistent, and the idea of hell is consistent with Second Temple Judaism. By the way, Rabbi Singer keeps telling Christians to repent so they won't be judged, but if there's no hell, then there's no question that they shouldn't worry about it. So while he's complaining about Christians bringing up hell and scaring people, he's busy scaring Christians to leave their faith. Not very consistent if you go from Singer video to Singer video. And we've done some of that, and we'll probably do more of that in the future. Judaism did teach hell. It wasn't agreed upon the particulars, and it wasn't necessarily agreed upon the length in which one consciously suffered. That's a discussion of annihilationism and eternal punishment, which is a different discussion altogether. But I want to be real clear about that. Okay? It was a part of Second Temple Judaism. So when Jesus talks about a final judgment where the wicked will be separated and the righteous will be preserved, this is totally in keeping with the thinking of the time. This sort of language was very, very common in the Essene community also, where there was going to be a final battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. So this is not beyond what Israel Jewish thinking thought during the time Jesus lived. Sorry, Rabbi Singer, you're misrepresenting Judaism, at least classical Judaism. I don't know what Judaism you're practicing as an Orthodox Jew, but classical Judaism during this time period had a very strong concept of that. Why bother with this whole dragnet thing? Okay? The idea of divine judgment wasn't new, but the question presents itself, why talk about this? Jesus is preparing them for something very important. I keep stating this. Okay? What's the first question the disciples have at the beginning of Acts? Let me turn there real quickly. You can keep your finger in Matthew. And I want you to notice when Jesus resurrects and he starts teaching them what their first question is, because you need to understand the way these guys were thinking. Okay? And he's teaching them for about 60 days, and then they ask this question. Which tells me if Jesus wanted to clarify their ideas about the kingdom, he had more than enough time to do it. Okay? Acts 1:6. Therefore they had come together. They asked him, saying, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? And he said, it is not for you to know the times or seasons which the Father has put in his own authority, or under his own authority. All right? And so they've been taught, according to verse 3, okay, to whom he presented himself alive after his suffering by many infallible proofs, being seen by them during 40 days, speaking of the things pertaining to the kingdom of God. So they go through seminary with Jesus for 40 days. All right? And so at the end of the 40 days, they're assembled, okay? And Jesus is promising them the Spirit. Now remember, the Spirit being given is timed perfectly to the Jewish Pentecost. That is by divine design. And the first question they have is, okay, now is it time for the kingdom? I mean, we've done the crucifixion thing. You're resurrected. You taught us about the kingdom. You were teaching us before. Okay, so let's get the show on the road. And so Jesus is constantly preparing them for the long interim. And so this is really important. Nobody who lived in this day expected a 2,000-year delay. And Paul thought it was going to happen in his lifetime because they're all expecting the interim to be very small. And so Jesus is constantly preparing them because they have to have understanding here. They have to understand, or they need this stuff because they need to be prevented from total discouragement and disillusionment. Hey, look, Jesus the King has come. It's time for the kingdom. Now the kingdom doesn't show up. Are we really following the right guy? I mean, there'd be incredible discouragement and disillusionment on the part of the disciples. And so many of these parables are told to help them with the delay in the establishment of the kingdom, even though the kingdom was inaugurated. We see this over and over again. But this is a major issue for these guys. And we need to understand that it was a major issue. So let me ask you a practical question. Have you ever been discouraged by the difference between God honoring your efforts and the immediate results? I mean, honestly, I don't know about you, but being in missions and teaching the word, I get sometimes discouraged because I don't see the results I want to see when I want to see them. And I bet you as a believer who is investing your life in the gospel and pouring your life into other people are sometimes discouraged between the efforts and the results. I mean, especially in our society is a cornflake society. People don't wait for anything anymore. Microwaves, cell phones. I love the new computer. Probably take a picture and post it when I start using it. I've been working on getting it set. But you know, the reality is everything's instant. I was explaining this to my dad. He's like, why do people not need to go to the bank? He's like 90 years old. And I said, Dad, it's compression. Why are people ordering groceries online? I said, Dad, it's compression. What? Well, understand that people are trying to do so much in a day because everything is moving so quickly that there are no delays and people aren't used to delays. And the disciples were human like we are. And so they wanted to see immediate stuff. I mean, they've been waiting for the kingdom. Israel's been waiting for the kingdom. Okay, now is it kingdom time? No. How do I help you with the discouragement? Well, the kingdom of heaven is like. It's like a giant dragnet that drags in good fish and bad fish. And at the end of the age, it will all get separated out. And you will be vindicated and the wicked will be dealt with. So that's why that's there. And so this parable, the dragnet, is just another one of these parables to help them with what they're going to face. You know, let's be honest about it. If we didn't see the kingdom inaugurated here, how much more didn't they see it inaugurated? I mean, Paul died without ever seeing the establishment of the kingdom, and that's a big thing. And so that is one of the reasons for this parable and some of the other parables. And so we need to understand that. Now, he's going to point out the value of understanding these things in terms of what they've been entrusted with. Now, the more truth you're entrusted with, the more privileged you really sort of are. not necessarily because you deserve the privilege, but knowing the mysteries of the kingdom is a tremendous privilege, is it not? So you understand what unbelievers do not understand, and what many of them will never understand, and what some of them can never understand because they do not have the discernment background or the equipment to be able to compare things in such a way as to give things their proper weight. In other words, they have puzzle pieces, but because they don't know how the whole puzzle works, they don't always know the value of even what they have. But you can. You can have that value and you can know that value. So Jesus is going to talk to them about this. All right. First he says, "Have you understood these things?" And they said, "Yes, Lord." So he's saying, "Okay, quiz time. Quiz time. Did you get what I'm saying to you?" Now, whether they understood the full import or not is another question. But they've got the basic ideas down, and so they say, "Yes, Lord." Uh, you know, and he said to them, "Good." Essentially, therefore, every scribe instructed concerning the kingdom of heaven is like a householder that brings out treasure, both new and old. Okay. And so the scribe who has all that Old Testament background, who now understands these things through a messianic lens, he's able to bring out old treasures, things that were good from the Old Testament, but he's able to bring out totally new treasures and see totally new connections. Someone said, "What changed for you as a Jew?" And I said, one of the great things that changed for me was I could understand my book in a whole new way because I could see the connections. All right. So the beauty of a saved Jewish person isn't that his soul is worth more than a Gentile person. It's that if he has that Jewish background, what God does is he makes the puzzle come together all of a sudden. And depending on that Jewish person, that ends up giving them a lot of resources that God can use uh, in them and with them to bless the rest of the body. You see what I'm saying? They become a resource. When this stuff clicks for them, then God can use them to share what this means to them and how it relates and how it fits together. So here's my plug. On our Chosen People site is our URL. I can put it up. But the thing is, there's value in having a worker, a minister, someone, depending on their gifts, who can bring their experiences as a Jewish person. And if they are gifted to some extent or another in teaching, different Jewish missionaries are, a little bit more focused in one way or another. It's usually a blessing to the church. And that's what I hear when I go to churches. So if you haven't had a Chosen People speaker, I'd love to come. And so you just have to go to the website and then do a search probably for us. There's a little long URL. And so someday I might get to see you guys in person. And that's always great. If I haven't already. Now, some of you I've already met because I've been to your church and then you refound me on the internet and been involved with us. And so cool. But there is value, whether it's me or some other gifted missionary. There really is value in that. And so I encourage churches to do that. All right. Anyway, now what happens next? Well, Jesus ends up going back to his home territory. It came to pass when Jesus had finished these parables that he departed from there, and he came to his own country, and he taught in their synagogue. So they were astonished and said, "Where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works?" And so Jesus returns back home. What's he doing teaching in their synagogues? Because it was the right of any bar mitzvahed male to be able to comment or exegete on a passage, deliver some sort of short homily or devotion based on what was being read in the synagogue. We see this later with Paul. Unfortunately, I have been somewhat disgusted by some of the things that comes out of young Jewish mouths when they're delivering their daresh. I heard one Jewish young man complain that God had done the wrong thing with the Canaanites, and it was totally horrible of him. And he essentially blasphemed and besmirch the character of the God of his fathers at his own bar mitzvah. And I thought this was sad. And he did so simply because he was poorly trained. So sad. It really kind of hurt. He was filled with liberal mush, and he was looking at the Bible through his mush glasses instead of looking at his liberalism through biblical glasses. And he wasn't given any good answers. There were answers to the things he was concerned about, but he wasn't being given those answers. And so I know this happens in Messianic congregations. I put more emphasis on them understanding what the text is talking about, the background of the text, and being able to exegete the text on some sort of devotional level than I do on them being able to say the blessings right. That's my emphasis. Now, some Messianic congregations manage to get both in and do a pretty good job of it. But you know what? I'd rather have somebody who understood the Dar Parsha he was talking about than necessarily got the blessings all right. In other words, the ceremonial to me is secondary to the theology. I'm not saying he shouldn't know those blessings. I think he should learn them. They're good to know. They're part of his background. But you know what? Never Jewishness at the expense of truth and Jesus. Okay? To be truly Jewish is being connected to the right king. And so to give up messianicness or Christ-likeness or Christ-centeredness for the sake of Jewishness destroys both. And it's a really bad choice to make. So that's my personal opinion. Okay? Let me read the next verses to you. Okay? I just basically read them anyway. Jesus came to his own country, and they ask, having a little trouble with this box. Here we go. I'm going to pull this up a little. Whoa. I guess I'm not going to pull this up a little. Can't do it. Let me talk to you about this, okay? Jesus goes to his own country. And remember, they end up saying, where did he get such teaching and where did he get these mighty deeds? Okay, that's 54. 55. Is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother Mary and his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas, and his sisters, are they not all with us? Where then did this man get these things? All right. Let me read the rest of this. So they were offended at him, and Jesus said, a prophet is without honor except a prophet is not without honor except in his own country and his own household. Now he did not do many mighty works because of their unbelief. And so the reaction of the townsfolk is they're offended. How dare he? Now they're not offended because he did mighty things and had wisdom. That was all pretty cool. All right? That wasn't where the problem was. The problem was simpler. They were offended because of familiarity. This is the kid. I remember this kid. This is the kid who was the poor carpenter's son. I mean, Mary is with us. We see her in the market all the time, and we see his brothers, and then they're named, and are his sisters not with us? Who is he to have such wisdom and such power? I mean, he's nobody. His family grew up, and they were no one special. So why should he be able to do these things and say these things? Where could he have possibly gotten this stuff from? Certainly not his family. Now you have to understand something very, very important in the Near East. Family reputation was everything. Okay, if you were from the wrong side of the tracks and your family had a bad reputation, that was going to be all over you. You were going to wear it. His family's not wealthy. Remember that Mary's offering is a poor person's offering. Joseph resets up the business. But he's never what we call in Yiddish a Ganstermacher. That means like a big shot. All right? And so he's not a Gonstermocker. And so the townsfolk are like, who is he? I mean, he doesn't come from a rabbinical family. Um, and so they're deeply offended, and they had an attitude of disbelief. We can't believe little Yeshua, who used to run around with our kids, whose family was like nothing special, is all of a sudden this incredible sage, even though we can't figure out where he gets this stuff from. Uh, so, um, special shout out to Elizabeth. It's good to see her again. Just a quick, I can't type fast enough. So, Um, and so that's what's going on here. And so Jesus didn't do many miracles there. Now, it doesn't say certain things, but Jesus' response from his own hometown, where he should be playing on the home court, is nothing wonderful. Okay. Now, there are some things we can get from this that are very interesting. First of all, it must be noted that he had half brothers and half sisters. Remember what we just read? Are his brothers not with us? Do his sisters not live with us? Okay, now why is this important? Well, understand Catholic doctrine. Mary was a perpetual virgin. Now we know there was only one person born of a virgin, that was Jesus. So now I got to ask, well, where did his brothers and sisters come from here? Catholicism has made a mistake. It's called Platonism, and the church still suffers in some sectors from what's called Neoplatonism. And that's the idea that matter is bad and spiritual is good. And so, Mary, in order to be pure and be the bearer of God, the mother of God, that's the way a Catholic would say it, she needs to never have had intimate relations with a man. So obviously she was a perpetual virgin. But see, here's where the problem is. This verse indicates that Jesus' town folks knew that he had half brothers and sisters. Now, why did I say half brothers and sisters? Because we know that out of Jesus' siblings, they were all the natural progeny, Jesus' brothers and sisters, of Joseph and Mary. But Jesus was not the natural progeny of Joseph and Mary, because God overshadowed her, and what was conceived in her was conceived by the Holy Spirit. So, Jesus's brothers and sisters are half brothers and half sisters because they share the same mother, but they do not share the same father. So, the idea that Mary was a perpetual virgin is totally destroyed by these verses. Okay? His sisters, that's referring to, well, is he not the carpenter's son? That's referring to Jesus. Is his mother not Mary? Well, we know that's referring to Jesus. And his brothers, James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas. All right? Well, Mary wasn't a perpetual virgin. I'm going to have to find out about someone's big day a little later. I just saw something in the chat. But we have that because I could put the chat up. So that'll be exciting. And so this is a terrible fiction. If you want one reason, there are several why I could never buy Catholicism. This would be one of them, because this can't possibly be true. Okay. Beware measuring people by mere appearance. Remember, Jesus is from a poor family that essentially immigrated back to the community. Remember, they were away for a while here. Joseph was not the Gonstermocker, and so it's very easy for us to look at people of humble means as being less. And so we need to be careful of measuring people by polish or by experience. D.L. Moody started life as a shoe salesman. We need to be very careful about that. If you looked at Jesus outwardly and you looked at his family, you wouldn't say, aha, here is the family the Messiah would obviously come from. So there are many who look polished, but they're not necessarily more sound and better experts than some who look less polished, but really are greater teachers and preachers. Popularity and polish are not indicators of spirituality or goodness. And if you don't believe this happens, I have experienced that it does. That sometimes the polished guys get all the press. We see this with celebrity Christianity, and I don't like it. By the way, if you put people on pedestals that are too big for them and where they're at, you're helping them to fall. So, yes, encourage people. People in that line of work and ministry need encouragement, but be careful. Uh, can I use names to protect the guilty? There's a certain gentleman who's very much a prosperity preacher that gets millions of people in, and that's, you know, just not a good thing. So be careful. Jesus's family was nothing to look at. By the way, of his brothers, one writes an epistle, two of them write an epistle, and one becomes the head of the church in Jerusalem. And so, two of his brothers who didn't necessarily fully grasp that they were growing up with God incarnate do come to belief, and we know about that. We know Mary treasured these things in her heart. We don't hear about any of Jesus's sisters directly. Church history might tell us some things, but it's a little hard to find them in the text. All right? Jesus is going to point out how difficult it is to witness to one's own family. Believe me. Okay, I'm thinking of doing an episode related to theodicy. Okay, the problem of evil. It's one of my dad's biggest objections. And he's constantly asking God to defend himself, which is just ridiculous. And we've had a lot of talks about the problem of evil, and they've been good talks. And I thought about doing a thing on the Holocaust, theodicy, and recent events, because it is an area that really resonates with me. And I grew up with this being an objection. And my dad's still playing the same objection. It is really, really hard. One of the hardest things for all of us, but I can say from a Jewish believing background, is relatives. Ooh, man. It is really difficult. And Jesus is going to say that among one's people who are familiar with him, witness can be really difficult. In fact, there's probably nothing harder than witnessing to one's own family. There are additional dynamics that make it hard for them to hear the gospel from you. Now, imagine a man who has lived very independently and successfully for 91 years, having his son tell him that he's wrong. Okay? That is really hard to take, especially if you grew up with a certain amount of male pride. With sisters or brothers, do they necessarily want big brother or big sister telling them what's right? There are additional dynamics. News reaches Herod about Jesus, Herod the Tetrarch, and he's going to have a response to Jesus. I'm going to try to get this in because we're going to talk about reincarnation a little. At the time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the report about Jesus and said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist who is risen from the dead." Therefore, these powers are at work in him. So Herod starts by believing this is John the Baptist raised from the dead. Reincarnation was not a normative Jewish view in the Second Temple period, but it is part of Jewish thinking now. When did it get introduced? Well, I can't say exactly when, but the Kabbalah introduces the idea of reincarnation and probably had a hand in popularizing it. I'm not going to say it was the only factor. I'm going to just say that it probably contributed. Gilgal, literally rolling. The Kabbalists conceive a soul as having its origin in divine emanation and being incarnated on earth. Now, there's some problems with that I'm not going to go into, okay? The soul of the wicked, one who has failed in his or her assignment, is punished and purified in hell or reincarnated. There's two possibilities there. Notice hell is mentioned. Gilgul literally has the idea of rolling, and so in certain cases, a wicked soul is denied even hell or reincarnation, but is exiled without the possibility of rest. Disembodied spirit running around. But sometimes the soul is allowed to come back and finish its task. This is Kabbalic teaching. And good questions come up, and I'll try to deal with that. It was not a normative part of Jewish thinking in the Second Temple period, but it does occur within Hasidic and Orthodox thinking today. So Vocab has been doing a lot on reincarnation. We've had a lot of talks, and I told him I have more information if he wants it. Reports of Jesus's miracles combined with Herod's conscience over the execution of John leads him to this bizarre idea. Okay, we got guilt plus the information about Jesus's miracles, and his imagination starts working overtime, and he comes to the conclusion that it's John reincarnated. That quote and that information comes from Richard T. France, Matthew, in the New Bible Commentary, page 922. So, now, in order to explain why he would think it's John and how John got executed, the details of John's execution are included for us in Matthew 14, 3 through 11. In other words, we're getting a little bit of a change of scene in order to explain something. Herod laid hold of John. Now, John has been preaching that Herod's marriage to his brother's wife, Herodias, was not kosher. And he is denouncing Herod for being lustful and wanting his brother's wife in a carnal sort of way. In a way that also was not lawful. This is not levirate marriage or any such thing. All right? John said it's unlawful to have her, and although he wanted to put him to death, he feared the multitude because they counted him a prophet. So Herod wants to pander to the crowd. Don't we see politicians do that today? So this is nothing new. When Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced. Now, it doesn't mean she did a jig. The indication is that Herodias was extremely attractive, and he liked looking at his daughter too. So his wife's getting a little bit ragged. He's got a bit of a thing for his daughter. I know, ew, right? Real problems morally. And so she does this intoxicating, very alluring, sort of seductive dance before company. Look at my beautiful daughter. And so he was excited. And so he mouths off this stupid promise. Gives an oath in front of his guests. See, now his honor's on the line. Honor such as it is, okay, his reputation. And he promised to give her whatever she asked, up to half the kingdom. And of course, her mother, who does not like John preaching against her marriage, and basically indicating that she is fornicating and kind of acting the part of the harlot, wants to get rid of John and shut him up. So she makes a deal with her daughter. You go ahead, get seductive for daddy. He'll just love it. You know, he likes looking. Sorry, it's the way it was. And so you go seduce your father and his company with this dance, okay? And get into some lingerie. And you do this awful, this thing, and then you give me John's head. So when he asks you what you want, you go ahead and do that. By the way, I'm still paying attention to that question. We just got to get to John here. A little side lesson. Okay, marriage is a wonderful thing. What goes on between a husband and wife is a beautiful thing, but sex can make you stupid under the wrong conditions. And this is what happened here. He lost his moral sense because his eyes and his lusts got in the way. Be careful. And that's, you know, guys, be careful, little eyes, what you see. You got to be a little careful. John gets killed. Jesus heard about it. He departs to a desert place. He's looking for direction from the Father. The multitudes come and they follow on foot from the cities, 14:13. And now we can get to some conclusions and I can get to this wonderful question. Genuine service for Jesus is not about short-term results. If you're going to serve Jesus Christ, you have to be in it for the long term. Is that convicting? That's convicting to me. I have some down days and a little bit of a melancholy temperament. And I come from a long line of pessimists. The crayons are kvetchers. And so I got to watch it. Response to Jesus in no way indicates who he is. How people respond to Jesus when I witness to him doesn't change who he is one little iota. He is Lord whether they like it or not. Places we often think would be the easiest for us to have a testimony are the places where it's most difficult to have a testimony. You would think at home it would be easy, it's hard. And so those are some conclusions. Let's go back to the questions here because there's one really cool one here. I'm going to pull up the chat bar here and move it down near the bottom. I am thrilled with everyone, and you can see the question here. And so you can see Corinth, is the Kabbalah in any way influenced by Eastern thinking, or did they come to that conclusion independently? I would say some of the thinking related to Platonism in particular finds its way into the Kabbalah. Pantheism a little bit. You have the emanations from the Ein Sof, God who is unknowable. The distinctions between creation and God are not so much moral as they are metaphysical. I think by the time you get to the Middle Ages, there have been other influences on Jewish thought. Can I go ahead and do a paper on it? Not at the moment. I don't think it was totally independently and in a vacuum. I would say ideas are influenced by other ideas. The Kabbalah is a Middle Age thing. There was exposure to Greek thinking and pantheism, and I think these things do play a role. It will be for some great scholar to write their dissertation on how much of a role. And so that's kind of where I'd leave you. Yes, I think so, but I don't have the documentation at this present time. But that is a great question, and I love it. I am also thrilled we've got some of our Aussie community here with us tonight. And if I say good day, it's going to have like a really weird Arizona sound, but it is just great to have you folks here with us tonight. That takes us into the next chapter of Matthew. It gave us some good things. And if you came in late, please go back and listen to the Nash of Hebrew. You will learn about the fatherhoods of God in time for Father's Day. And so that will give you a better appreciation for God's fatherhood, the fact that there are multiple fatherhoods of God. And so I'd encourage you. And again, that's just a little nosh because I actually have a whole message on that. So that's where we're going to leave things for tonight. If you are in Australia, I'm trying to figure out what time it would be. Wow, you would be in an entirely different time zone. Like further than Israel and further than, wow, I can't even picture. So it is probably like a very different time. Haha, excellent. And so I'm going to sign off. God bless. Have a great Father's Day. If you are a man who does not have children, you are still a discipler of people. Therefore, you can be a spiritual father of people. Do not feel left off, because fatherhood can be used in the metaphoric sense in the Hebrew. The sons of the prophets were the disciples of the prophets, and so you can engage in reflecting our Father God's fatherhood towards other people. Be blessed. Enjoy Father's Day. Connect any way you can. And I'll look forward to seeing you all next week. By the way, oh wow, 1 p.m. Wow, that's bizarre. So now I'm thinking of which day. Oh well, that's okay. I have enough trouble keeping track of the 3 time zones between the 2 that my family live in and us out in the West, and no daylight savings time. So I'll just leave it at that. And I'm going to say good evening. And I am thrilled for everyone that was here. And how about this? Be blessed and refreshed. I will double check my spelling. There you go. Be blessed and refreshed.